In 2010, Pauline and I had the opportunity to travel both to Turkey and to China. And while we were in China, we were really amused at many of the signs that were there because they would put them in English for us tourists. And many times the signs were just spelled so wrongly that it was just funny. But other times they were spelled right, but we just wouldn't have expressed it that way. When we were at the Great Wall of China, as you came there, they had the list of all the prices for admission. And so they had the listed for general admission, and they had the list for students, and they had the list for children, and then they had the list for the old. The old. Now, we would have said seniors, right? But the old. In our culture, we will say seniors, or we may say for a specific age, 65 or 60 or even 55. And a few years ago, I was surprised when I was at Denny's for breakfast with my children, I discovered that I qualified there on the seniors menu and went, no, how did that happen? What happened on that? So you've noticed the title of the message this morning. Psalms or prayers for the aged, for the ages and the aging. And some of you may have looked at that and said, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm nowhere near old. And that's a pretty common reaction when you're younger. That always applies to someone else way down the road. But as we see in the psalm we're looking at this morning, you will identify with it far, far sooner than you can imagine. Something I love about our church, because it's a smaller church, because it's a rural church with rural flavor, is that we have a healthy, intergenerational mix. And that's something that is so important and so healthy. I know that I enjoy being able to get to know and interact with the children of our church. I enjoy being able to participate in music, like with Brittany and Jordan and Denzel and others, to be able to get to know them as I'm participating in music, and that's just kind of fun. So that's my retirement plan, is to just do music with young people. That would be good. So anyway, that is so much fun as well. Then I get to interact with those that are seniors, who I guess are more and more my peers now in that age group. Now it's just you have coffee with them and interact them, and that is really good. Our psalm this morning encompasses people at all stages of life. All can identify with bedrock truths that Psalm 90 and Psalm 71 proclaim. Now, you may resonate more deeply with those truths if you have more of years in the rearview mirror, but we all live in this thing called time. And it's important that we understand time from a biblical perspective. So let's dive in and look at a prayer for the ages and a prayer for the aging. We're going to read all of Psalm 90, and then we're going to, at one point, read some of Psalm 71. So Psalm 90. Follow along whatever way works best for you. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting. You are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that's just gone by, or like a watch in the night. You sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it's dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger. We're terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins, in the light of your presence. All of our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow. For they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord. How long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all of our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest upon us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes. Establish the work of our hands. It's quite a psalm. Powerful psalm. And in it, there's some foundational truths that we understand about time, about God, about ourselves as we interact and we live in this strange thing called time. The first foundational truth is a truth about eternity, that God stands beyond time. You've been our dwelling place throughout all generations. He's described from everlasting to everlasting. We sang about that. The one who existed before the mountains were born, the one who brought forth the whole world, described as the one who turns people back to dust, the one who is described 1,000 years are in your sight are like a day that's just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Something that's hard to do, but really kind of fun to do, is try to think about eternity and about God who is eternal. God who stands beyond time. God who stands above time. Now, the old hymn has that line, when the trumpet of the Lord shall sound and time shall be no more. That phrase actually comes from some older translations of in Revelation 10, verse 6, when it says, and there shall be no more time. But as you unpack that a little bit and you look at other translations and you look at the context, it's actually talking about some of the events that will take place, and many translations now use and say, and there will be no more delay, which is a whole different meaning, that there is no more time. Some have used that verse along perhaps with the description of the New Jerusalem in Revelation chapter 21, and where it says, on no day will its gates ever be shut, and there will be no night there. So I'm thinking of time. How can you have time without day and night? Although it says, on no day will its gates be ever shut. So is it talking about there is time? Or if there's no night, is it saying that there is no time? See, until recently, we described time by the passage of day and night. That gave us our measurement of time, days and hours and seasons and years. And on a popular level, that's still how we measure time, by those markers. Now, scientists, of course, they have a different description because, and if you want to waste a bit of time, you can Google for a scientific, for definitions of time. But scientists tell us that those markers of day and night, and those aren't completely reliable because the Earth is slowing down in its rotation. So every 100 years or so, it takes 1.4 milliseconds more for the Earth to make its rotation. So every 100,000 years, it takes 1.4 seconds more for the Earth to make a rotation. So that is completely unreliable, and we need another measurement of time. So how do you measure time? Well, they've decided, in their wisdom of scientists, that there is another standard. They've made this atomic clock in which 1 second is 9,192,631,770 cycles of the radiation of cesium, the 133 atom. That's helpful, isn't it? Well, that might be helpful for physicists, but I have a question for them. If the universe, as they say, is evolving from a Big Bang, how do they know that the properties of cesium or any other elements are that stable and they're not actually changing or haven't changed somewhere along the way? If everything's evolving, can't the elements evolve too? Well, they assume that the building blocks of Earth, the building blocks are somehow stable. That they aren't changing in that way, that the essential building blocks are somehow stable. You can't make sense of the universe unless you have something that is unchanging. Unless you have something eternal. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? There is a God who is from everlasting to everlasting. That is what our God is. He is, and He is the one who's created everything and the things that are changing. But He is eternal. He is from everlasting to everlasting. When you look in the New Testament, it says, do not forget this one thing, dear friends, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. So it flips that backwards. A day is, 1,000 years and 1,000 years, puts both of them. And God stands above time. Been our dwelling place throughout all generations. We live in time, but God stands above it. The other psalm I want to point you to a little bit is Psalm 71. It's a psalm that's actually focused very much on time, on people through various stages of life. I'm going to read selected verses of it. Follow along. I'll tell you what verses I'm reading. Psalm 71, just notice all the references to time in here. Lord, in you, Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Verse 1. Verse 3, be my rock of refuge to which I can always go. Give the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. Verse 5, you have been my hope, sovereign Lord, my confidence since my youth. Verse 6, from birth I have relied on you. You brought me forth from my mother's womb. I will ever praise you. Verse 8, my mouth is filled with your praise, declaring your splendor all day long. Verse 9, do not cast me away when I am old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone. Verse 12, do not be far from me, my God. Come quickly to help me. Verse 14, as for me, I will always have hope. I will praise you more and more. 15, my mouth will tell of your righteous deeds, all your saving acts all day long, though I know not how to relate to them all. Verse 17, since my youth, God, you have taught me, and to this day I will declare your marvelous deeds. And my favorite verse in Psalm 71, verse 18, even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come. And verse 24, my tongue will tell of your righteous acts all day long, for those who wanted to harm me have been put to shame and confusion. First foundational truth is that God stands beyond time. And because of that, he is with us all our lives. What can you think of in your life that hasn't changed? Everything changes except the truth that God is with us. Through all our lives, God is the one who remains the same. He stands beyond time. And yes, that's a little hard to think about, to stretch our mind, to try and think about eternity. But in this changing world and in the world of uncertainties, that truth is so encouraging. Everything in our life will change except God. Everything in life is different than the generations that came before. But God is the same. He stands beyond time and he meets with every generation. So that's one foundational truth about time. Eternity, God stands beyond time. Another truth is this: brevity. Our lives are short, our limited time. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. You sweep people away in the sleep of death. They're like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it's dry and withered. That's not very complimentary terms to talk about us as we age, but that's what it says. Verse 10, our days may come to 70 years or 80, for strength endures. Best of them are but trouble and sorrow. They quickly pass, and we fly away. The future seems so far away, and suddenly it's the present. And then the present so quickly becomes the past. The pace that happens is constant in one sense, but in another sense seems fluid. When we're waiting for summer holidays, time moves slowly. When we're on summer holidays, time disappears a lot more quickly. When we're enduring something unpleasant, like a pandemic, or waiting for something with great anticipation, the time crawls. But even if days or weeks at times seem slow, the years passed by. I know in this pandemic, when people were under lockdown initially, people said the days go slow, but the weeks passed quickly. How does that happen? That seems to be the way that it goes. Some of you haven't experienced things at that quickness as much yet, but you will far sooner than you think. As you age, each passing year seems shorter. And it is because it's an increasingly smaller fraction of your entire life. The longer you live, the more you're going to resonate with this description of Psalms saying how quickly life passes. Oh, when you're younger, life is stretching out ahead of you, and, there's nothing but time. But then you reach a few milestones. You go to school, and you finish school. You start a job, and before you know it, you're retiring from working. You get married, And then suddenly you're looking at grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Your whole life is a blur in your rearview mirror. Yeah, some days or even some months might drag, but years and decades, they catch you by surprise, don't they? I'm sort of caught by surprise and trying to wrap my head around the fact that my 3 older siblings, who are all very close in age to me, have all reached 60. And I'd like to say I'm much younger than them, but not that much younger than them. When you're younger, you hear the older people wondering, where has all the time gone so quickly? And then you discover time flies when you're having fun, and time flies when you're facing the deadlines of the paper that's due or that exam that's coming up, and then time is a little quicker. You don't have enough time then. But before long, you'll be saying to your children and your grandchildren, where has all the time gone? And those of you that have a few more years in your rearview mirror saying, yep, that's the way that it goes. Brevity. I won't say much more on brevity. That would be counterproductive, wouldn't it? The next one is difficulty. Notice verses 7 through 11. We're consumed by your anger, terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before us, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years, 80. If our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow. Verse 11, if only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is due you. That's a pretty harsh reality, isn't it? That's a pretty discouraging description. The time we have on earth is filled with difficulty. It's a truth that we can't ignore. You don't have to teach an infant to cry. They do that automatically when they discover something difficult or unpleasant. And life continues to give us plenty to cry about. Scripture doesn't sugarcoat reality. It acknowledges that life includes a lot of difficulty, hardship, trouble, and sorrow. We live in a society that increasingly is ignoring God, trying to write God out of the picture. But when it does, it doesn't have an answer for the difficulty that we experience in our time on earth. If life is, as some scientists suggest, the random outcome of chance, then how do we explain easy and hard, good and evil? If they're just meaningless, if it's just a random description of random events, how do you say one is good and one is bad? Evolution describes things as good, anything that perpetuates our species, and bad is anything that threatens our survival. But if everything is random, is survival inherently any better than extinction? It's not. If our species become extinct, isn't that just another random outcome event? And what's to stop another better species from randomly generating? How can you actually describe some things as good or bad or hard or difficult? It's just all just random. But there is something within us that labels some experiences of life bad or harmful or wrong or evil. Scripture has an explanation for what's happening in this time we experience on earth. God created a good earth, filled it with good things, and created people to inhabit and care for the earth. But people chose to separate themselves from the author of good and the author of life. So the result was the curse of death. Since that time, we've lived under a curse, and we've lived under God's wrath. That is, an existence that is less than it should be and less than it could be, and an existence that's plagued with difficulty. Plagued with difficulty because we're estranged from the source of goodness. We all encounter the ongoing fallout from the curse, and we encounter that in various degrees throughout all our lifetime. We're subject to the ultimate consequence of separating ourselves from the source of good, and that is death. And in the meantime, we experience, in various degrees of intensity, we experience guilt. We know instinctively that something is wrong, and we know instinctively that we're part of the problem. Our attitudes or actions are not what they could be, not what they should be. We have a sense of accountability. We know we're not measuring up. That is part of the difficulty of life. Fortunately, as people of faith, we put our faith in Jesus, who can forgive. We can be reconciled and restored. But there is that difficulty, and that difficulty is a reality. It talks about moaning in verse 9. There are things that just hurt. Physical aches and pains, emotional distress. Yeah, as youngsters, we have skin knees or broken bones or stomach aches and ear aches and any other physical episodes that make us cry out in pain. But over the years, the physical ailments, they probably increase, and we also experience more emotional pain that can cause us to moan. Again, as believers, we come to Jesus, who is the one who heals. It says we have trouble and sorrow. Worry, anxiety, hardships, setbacks, war, famine, pandemic, that's all part of the world we inhabit. And the older we get, the more exposure we have to the difficulty of that life. Again, Jesus is the one who promises to be with us always. But there are hardships of aging. In Psalm 71, it says, though you have made me see troubles, many and bitter, you'll restore my life again. You've made me see troubles, many and bitter. It's an interesting description. And as you age, those start to stack up. They start to accumulate. There is a fear of death, and as much as we're believers, we still have that trepidation. There is a loss of strength as you age. You just don't have the strength anymore. More of a sense of vulnerability. You used to have the world by the tail and you could tackle anything, and now there's a little bit more fear, vulnerability. At times, it becomes, you used to be able to do everything for yourself, but then as you age, there are times and stages where you have to become far more dependent. So you lose that independence. It becomes a forced dependence. And sometimes that comes with a loss of dignity, depending exactly on the path of aging and how it works for you. And then there's the whole idea as you age that the fear of being devalued or misinterpreted. Used to be when you were younger, you were working, you were involved in all of those important things, and then as you're older, what's the significance of your life? You're no longer that title that you were when you're working, and that's no longer as big of a part of life. Now, it might be that in ancient cultures, people honored their senior members more than we do, but the Psalms reflect very clearly that aging has always been difficult. I love Psalm 71. It says, do not cast me away when I'm old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone. Aging isn't for the faint of heart. There are some daunting challenges. Some have faced those challenges, and many others have walked alongside parents or grandparents through some of those journeys towards the end of life, terminal illness, disease, dementia. Trouble and sorrow are part of life. Now, if that's where the psalm ended, that would be a pretty depressing morning, wouldn't it? It's not where the psalm ends. Those who ignore the truth that God is eternal, all they have is the perspective that life is short and life is hard. And then you die. And that's it. That's all she wrote. That's a perspective without faith. But the Psalms, they ground us in the truth of the eternal God who is above time, the God of all generations. And that makes an incredible difference. Because a big truth, a huge truth in this psalm is the opportunity of time. The surprising opportunity that life gifts us with. Verse 12 through the end. Teach us to number our days and we gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord, how long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we might sing for joy, be glad all of our days. Make us glad for as many days you've afflicted us, for as many years as we've seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest upon us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. The surprising opportunity we have in this thing we call time is that the God who created a good world will continue to pursue us with goodness and mercy. In verse 6, morning is described as a prelude to a day that is quickly going to vanish away. Do you notice in verse 14, morning is more than that? Morning is an opportunity to experience God's love, to find satisfaction and meaning in his unfailing love. We have the opportunity to experience joy. It talks about experiencing joy, experiencing gladness. The opportunity to engage in meaningful work, establish the work of our hands. That may be physical, that work that connects us, work that connects us to others. It might be work that just helps others experience God's blessing. We get to experience God's grace and mercy. To discover his favor as he sends the rain and the sunshine on both the righteous and the unrighteous. The opportunity to experience the mercy of the eternal God, because it's the opportunity to be reconciled to him. To develop a relationship with that God who stands beyond time. In this episode of time that we have, we can come to our senses and realize that the Father we have run away from is the source of all good. It's the opportunity to turn from our prodigal rebellion, to return to our Father's house. And when we do, we discover that he's eagerly waiting for us, and he welcomes us with an extravagant celebration, despite the sorry and disheveled state of ruin that we've inflicted on ourselves by our rebellion. Yes, life is a time that's fleeting. It's difficult, but in tension with those truths is the incredible truth that time is an opportunity for us to sing for joy. There's 4 verses that talk about the brevity of time in Psalm 90, 5 verses that talk about the difficulty of time, but 6 verses that express the opportunity of time to experience blessing and joy. I take great comfort in that. And I'm not going to build a theology on the relative number of verses on comfort versus difficulty versus brevity, but I like that idea, and it's interesting that Psalm does have more to say about joy and gladness than it does about difficulty or about brevity. Every person will have a different mixture of sorrow and joy in their life. But as we ground it in the God of eternity, we discover a God who is good. Yes, we live in a world that is under a curse because we live in a world that's still trying to run away from God. We feel that. Sometimes we feel it very deeply. And our physical life will end. But in the time we have, we've got an incredible opportunity to enjoy an immense amount of good and an incredible opportunity to be reconciled to the God who is good. To gain that assurance that when this life is over, we will enter an eternity where we will experience good that is no longer spoiled by the curse. So what are some of the implications and applications of this? Well, there's 2 verses that really become foundational, one in Psalm 90 and one in Psalm 71. Teach us to number our days. We need to be intentional in the use of our time. Now, you could take that very literally by calculating how many days you have lived, for instance, 21,466. And you can do the math, or you can go on Google and you can say, how many days have I lived? And they have a calculator. You can put in your birthday and they tell you exactly how many days you've lived. But being intentional is more than just saying, I've lived so many days. Being intentional is discovering that God has something for us. May the favor of the Lord our God rest upon us. Establish the work of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Discover that God is for you and God has something for you. God is for you, that's that reconciliation and recognizing him as the Father who celebrates that relationship with you. Despite how much of a sorry mess we've made of things, he welcomes us back and throws this huge party, this celebration. So he is for you. Much of life and sorting out our emotions and our self-worth and identity is just sorting that out, discovering that, yes, God is for us. Even if we think we have it handled, then something shatters our self-identity, and we've got to come back to that. Yes, God is for me. But God is for you, and he has something for you. Now, the work of our hands, that might change through the stages of life. But God is always leading, and he's always teaching us. Some stages of life, that's going to be more focused on work to make money or to make the things of life go together. In other stages, it becomes more just relational and interpersonal. Discipleship, that journey of discipleship, getting to know God better and engaging with others. And we do that together in a way. Starting September 20th, I'm starting a series called Walking with God. And the series is exploring how Scripture uses the activity of walking in describing our discipleship journey. And with that I'm going to challenge you. There's a challenge coming up in that in that series that we can all engage in one way or another. God has something. God is for you, and God has something for you. So we can live with life on tippy-toe, with anticipation, saying, what has God got for me? And as we wake up in the morning, it's not just something that's going to quickly pass away, but it is time to say, what does God have for me this morning? What are we going to enjoy together today? Teach us to number our days. Be intentional in the use of time. The other application is simply this. The application of generations. Learn from other generations and invest in other generations. That 71:18. Even when I'm old and gray, don't forsake me till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come. So if you are in the older generations, participate with people who are of a different generation. Participate with them in some way or other. Encourage them. Take an interest in their life. And as well, respect the unique challenges of each generation. There's far different challenges that the generation growing up now and going through university now, far different challenges that they're facing right now than I faced, than you faced when we were going through school and finishing college and establishing our career. Far different challenges. Recognize that. Share with them. Share perspective, though, not prescription. This is what has helped me, not this is what you should do. It's a much better way to be able to share, and I think you get a more receptive audience when you're saying, this is what has helped me, than you should. It's so easy to look at the generation, well, they should just do things like we did it, and everything would be fine. No, it's a different generation, different issues. And so participate with them, engage with them, find a way to connect with them. But do so in a way that is going to just invite them. When you're younger, take that time to connect with someone of another generation, of an older generation. Older generations love to encourage you, but I'll let you in on a little secret here. Many times it's not because of what you already are, but because of what you're becoming. Yes, we're delighted about what you're doing a good job with this, but we're more delighted about your path than your performance. Where you're headed, how God is shaping you, the gifts that He's starting to unpack and develop in your life. Because when it really comes down to it, yes, when you have the 4-year-old or 6-year-old doing their little ditty on the piano we're singing, that their performance is probably not the greatest. And even as we get a little further on, but we encourage them because we're so enthused about what they're developing, what they're becoming, about their path, not their performance. So take time to get to know another generation and listen not just for their encouragement and praise, but seek their wisdom, seek their advice. Assume that they know more than they're saying, because they do. And spend enough time with them to understand their story, understand how God has worked in their life, and be encouraged to how God can work in your life as well. So be intentional in the use of your time. And find a way to connect with generations other than your own. Because, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations.